I learned early that in polished rooms my silence was treated as proof that I had no standing. My name is Claire Carson, Operations Counsel, former tactical analyst, and for reasons that became clear under cold light and polished brass, the woman my future mother-in-law considered easiest to erase. People hear that sentence and assume anger came first. It did not. What came first was calibration, the way a room arranged itself by rank, donation tier, legacy surname, and usefulness, and the way I learned to read that arrangement as if it were a tactical map. Silence was not a lack of language in my life. It was a language. It told me who expected compliance, who feared visibility, and who would stand still while someone else was pushed out of frame. By the time I was 34, I had spent enough years in command centres and legal review rooms to trust documents over promises and procedures over sentiment. I also knew the private cost of that discipline. My mother used to press my sleeves smooth before school ceremonies and say, "Hold your posture. People respect composure." She meant it as protection. In practice, composure became the evidence people used against me. At scholarship dinners, I was quiet. At board briefings, I was hard to read. At family tables, I was sensitive when I corrected a factual error and cold when I chose not to. Every label functioned the same way. It moved authority away from me without ever naming the theft. The pattern was old, long before the night at Naval Heritage Hall, but that was the first time someone made the ritual explicit in front of donors, trustees, officers, and extended family, and called it tradition. The hall sat on the waterline, all waxed floors and framed service flags with fluorescent chandeliers that flattened everyone into a careful sheen. Brass plaques along the entrance corridor listed campaign names and benefactors. Some of those names also appeared on foundation checks, legal filings, and event programs that crossed my desk. I arrived 12 minutes early because punctuality is one of those habits you keep when uncertainty is high. My mother arrived with me and held my elbow for 3 steps before releasing it, a gesture so slight it might have looked accidental to anyone else. It was not accidental. It was our private signal from years earlier. Stand straight, speak only when needed, and memorize the room. Inside, a string quartet moved through a restrained arrangement while staff adjusted place cards on linen tables. The cards were thick stock, embossed, arranged by family clusters and institutional affiliations. I scanned for my name and found it where protocol would place a fiancé. Head table, right side, near the Hart trustees and my own guests. I scanned for my mother's name and found it 2 tables back, still acceptable, not ideal. I noted both placements because habits built in operations do not shut off in social settings. My fiancé, Daniel, was pulled into conversations near the donor wall, smiling with the fixed expression of a man trying to satisfy 10 obligations at once. He lifted a hand when he saw me. I nodded back. That was the extent of our exchange before the first toast. Evelyn Hart made her entrance not dramatically, but with practiced timing. She paused just inside the central aisle until 3 people turned toward her, then another 5, then the rest. She wore pearl grey and a narrow brooch set with old stones. Family piece, legacy signal. When she reached me, she touched my forearm lightly, the way one might greet a junior volunteer, and said, "You look appropriate." It was an assessment, not a compliment. Then she moved on to greet 2 trustees by first name and 1 admiral by rank, her smile expanding and narrowing as required. She had built a life on social geometry, and she was very good at it. The first 20 minutes passed in ceremonial efficiency. Welcome remarks, acknowledgement of service families, charitable impact statement, donor gratitude. I recognised half the language from prior drafts circulated through the Foundation office. I had flagged 2 legal ambiguities in those drafts the week before. Both edits were accepted without attribution. When the MC invited Evelyn to offer a family toast, the room quieted in the particular way rooms do when money and history are listening. She lifted her glass, looked directly at Daniel, then at the trustees, then allowed her gaze to settle on me as if I were an administrative item requiring correction. "Tonight," she said, "we gather to welcome continuity." A few people smiled, relieved to hear the expected vocabulary. "We are grateful for those who honour our name, our service, and our standards." She turned slightly, so her next line travelled across the front tables before landing on me. "Family seats are for real Carsons, Claire. You may sit with staff." The words were clean and measured. That was what made them effective, No raised voice, no overt sneer, no phrasing a witness could easily call abuse. Just a sentence engineered for deniability and impact. I heard the quartet stop between movements. I heard one fork touch porcelain at the far end of the room. I heard my own pulse in my left ear. Steady, not fast, the way it used to sound when a briefing went sideways and everyone waited to see who would panic first. No one intervened. Not Daniel. Not the trustees who had relied on my legal notes. Not the relatives who later told me they were shocked. Their eyes performed the old choreography. Slide away, return briefly, settle somewhere safer. Chairs tightened under people adjusting posture. A man from the Veterans Committee looked down at his program and kept looking down. A woman from the scholarship board pressed her lips together and took a sip of water she did not need. One junior events coordinator, maybe 26, shifted a place card half an inch toward my original seat and then froze when Evelyn glanced her way. That small movement stayed with me longer than the insult did. It meant someone had seen the line, even if she lacked the rank to cross it. Daniel stepped toward me, then stopped, caught between mother and fiancé, bloodline and conscience, public optics and private obligation. I did not rescue him from that moment. I did not rescue anyone. I set my glass down, lifted my clutch, and walked to the staff table at the perimeter, where 2 catering supervisors had already begun to rise in confusion. "Please," I said quietly. "Stay seated." I took the open chair nearest the service corridor and folded my napkin on my lap as if the arrangement had been mine all along. Humiliation has a temperature. It is not hot the way people imagine. It is cold, procedural, and precise. It narrows the field until details sharpen. The seam in the tablecloth, the citrus oil on polished wood, the tiny scrape in the brass edge of the centerpiece tray. As Evelyn resumed her toast with language about unity and legacy, I watched the room reorganize around her authority and understood, with an old and familiar clarity, that this was never about etiquette. It was governance by spectacle. She did not need me gone physically. She needed me demoted symbolically, in public, with witnesses who would carry the revised hierarchy into every conversation after tonight. I thought of earlier rooms then, the ones that had trained me for this without my consent. My 16th birthday, when my stepfather introduced his colleague's daughter as the disciplined one, while I stood beside the cake I had baked myself. My law school graduation dinner, when a family friend congratulated my brother for my clerkship offer because he had better courtroom instincts. My first promotion after the rescue analysis cycle that became a classified case study when Evelyn sent flowers addressed to Daniel Carson and guest. Pattern is the most honest form of evidence. By that point, I had a file in my head of every omission, every edit, every social correction delivered with a smile sharp enough to cut but polished enough to pass for manners. Halfway through dinner, a retired captain approached my table under cover of thanking the catering staff. He did not sit. He kept his voice low. "Miss Carson, that was not acceptable." "No," I said. He looked toward the head table and back to me. "Will you respond?" "Not here." He gave one restrained nod, as if acknowledging an operational decision, and returned to his seat. That exchange mattered because it marked the first external witness who named the act without softening it. Not misunderstanding, not family stress, not bad timing, not acceptable. Language restores proportion when people try to shrink what happened. When dessert plates were cleared, Evelyn made a show of inviting immediate family to a photo beneath the foundation crest. The photographer called names from a list. Mine was not called. My mother's was not called. We stood where we were and watched the arrangement lock into place. Centerline blood relatives, trustees on either side, Daniel beside Evelyn with a jaw set hard enough to show from 20 feet away. The flash fired 3 times. In each image, I was absent by design. And everyone present would later describe the evening as beautiful, dignified, and successful. On the drive home, my mother kept both hands folded around her purse and looked out at the harbour lights sliding across the windshield. She waited until we stopped at a red light near the old federal building before she spoke. "Are you going to call this what it is?" "Yes," I said. "Good." By the second week of September, I had written down every detail from that dinner while the sequence was still fresh. Seating chart, witness positions, quoted language, order of toasts, who looked away, who looked ashamed, who moved a card and then stopped. People think documentation is vindictive when a woman does it. As in my profession, documentation is how truth survives preference. I was not gathering ammunition for a dramatic scene. I was establishing a record because records outlast charisma. If Evelyn wanted hierarchy performed in public, she would have public consequences when she crossed the wrong boundary. That was the moment I realized this would not remain a private conflict resolved by polite calls and softened apologies. It had entered institutional terrain: guest registries, charitable bylaws, ceremonial authority, and fiduciary control. She believed she was managing optics. I understood she was creating discoverable events. The difference between those two beliefs would decide the wedding, the foundation, and the room that believed I could be moved like furniture. My name is Claire Carson, and that night was the first line in the record that would return me to the centre without raising my voice once. When the light turned green, I eased the car forward and kept my eyes on the lane markers until the old federal building fell behind us and the harbour lights thinned into residential streets. My mother did not feel silence to soften me. She never had. At the next intersection, my phone began to vibrate against the console, the screen flashing Daniel's name, then flashing again before I touched it. I put the call on speaker because my hands were still steady and I wanted that fact to remain true. "Where are you?" he asked. His voice carried the clipped breath of someone speaking from a corridor, not a room. "Driving Mum home. I need you to come back. Tonight." "For what?" A pause, then. "My mother says the photography release and seating confirmation have to be signed by immediate family before midnight for the Foundation newsletter. She says if you don't sign now, it delays all formal announcements." My mother turned her face toward the windshield, but I saw her jaw set in the reflected streetlight. "Then, delay them," I said. "Claire." He lowered his voice. "Please, just come in, sign, leave. We can discuss the rest later." He had not said she was wrong. He had said please, as if the problem were tempo, not conduct. I almost declined and ended the call there, but the phrase seating confirmation stayed in my head like a steel pin. I had seen enough institutional manoeuvring to know paperwork filed at night was rarely neutral by morning. "I'll return for 10 minutes, I said. "No more." The hall lot was still half full when I drove back. Through the front glass, staff were stacking service carts while clusters of guests lingered under portrait lighting, the late evening phase when people said things they would deny in daylight. My mother touched my wrist before I stepped out. "Do not give them your temper," she said. "Give them your memory." Inside, the air had changed from dinner perfume to lemon cleaner and cold metal. I followed Daniel's text to the smaller foundation salon off the main corridor, where a long cherrywood table held clipped packets, empty champagne flutes, and a silver pen placed exactly at centre, ceremonial and theatrical at once. Evelyn stood near the head chair with 2 trustees, the events director, and the foundation communications manager. She did not look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. "There she is," she said, not warmly, not hostile, simply claiming the room before I could. "We're finalizing publication assets. Sit by Marisol, please. Principal signatures are first." Marisol was the junior events coordinator who had moved my place card earlier and stopped. She stood near the wall now, folder pressed to her chest, eyes lowered. I remained where I was. "Daniel said this is for photography release and seating confirmation." "It is," Evelyn said. "Administrative details. Families must proceed efficiently." One trustee, Mr. Bellamy, gave me a polite half-smile that communicated reluctance without solidarity. Daniel reached for my elbow, then withdrew before contact, as if even touch required committee approval. Evelyn opened the top packet and slid one page toward him. "Sign here, Daniel. Family table rights and image licensing." Then she turned to me and tapped a different page with one lacquered nail. "And this line for you, Claire. Secondary acknowledgements." I took the document and read from the title line down. It was not a photography release, it was an amended seating exhibit tied to the wedding ceremony program and foundation archive, with signatory categories divided into primary family, legacy trustees, and auxiliary participants. My name appeared under auxiliary participants. My mother's name was absent. 2 guests from my side had been moved to pending verification. The language was clean, drafted to look procedural, and designed to calcify humiliation into institutional record. I looked up. "This is not what Daniel described." Evelyn's smile narrowed by a degree. Your operations counsel, Claire. You understand classification frameworks. Not all participants carry equal ceremonial weight. Ceremonial weight is not a legal category. Everything is legal to you. Her voice lifted just enough for the trustees to hear. In families, we also consider tradition. Then came the quote she wanted witnessed. She set her glass down with deliberate softness and said, "You may marry my son, but you do not inherit a surname by argument. Sign where assigned." No one spoke. Mr. Bellamy looked at the ceiling moulding as if evaluating restoration work. The communications manager pretended to check an email. Daniel stared at the page in front of him as if text might rearrange itself into courage. I could feel heat rise behind my ribs, that old surge that arrives when a person recasts your life as an administrative inconvenience. But rage in rooms like that always served the presiding officer. Anger could be framed as instability, and instability could be attached to minutes, emails, witness recollections. I set the packet down carefully. "I will not sign a mislabeled document," I said. "Provide the full revision history and governance authority for these changes." Evelyn laughed once, quiet and dry. "Listen to that. We are trying to celebrate, and she is conducting discovery." Marisol flinched. Daniel finally spoke, too softly. "Mum, maybe we can do this tomorrow." Evelyn did not look at him. "No, we will complete this tonight." I turned to Marisol because she was the one person in the room paid to maintain records, and records were the only language Evelyn respected when emotion failed. "Who logged this amendment?" I asked. Marisol hesitated. "I received the file from Mrs. Hart's office at 9:12. "Was version control retained?" "Yes." Evelyn's tone sharpened. "You are not being deposed, Marisol." "I asked a procedural question," I said. "You are not in command here, Claire." The sentence was crafted to reduce me publicly, to turn competence into overreach. I let it stand in the air, untouched. Then I reached into my clutch, removed my own pen, and wrote across the signature block in narrow block print, "Declined pending document authentication and registry verification." I added date, time, and initials. Not dramatic, just irreversible. Evelyn stared at the notation, then at me. "That annotation has no standing." "It has evidentiary value," I said. "Please include it in the file." For the first time that night, one trustee intervened, not to defend me, but to protect process. "Evelyn," Mr. Bellamy said, "perhaps counsel review is prudent if there is a classification dispute." Her eyes flashed toward him, then cooled. "Noted." I nodded to Marisol, to no one else, and walked out before anyone could frame my departure as consent. In the corridor, my mother waited on a bench beneath a bronze plaque listing names of benefactors older than my grandparents. She took one look at my face and stood. "Did they put it in writing?" she asked. "They tried." She exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh, almost grief. "Then they gave you what you need." By 9 the next morning, rain had flattened the city into grey bands, and I sat in my office with the annotated copy request draft open on one screen and the foundation bylaws on another. I sent a formal preservation notice to the events office, copied to trustees and council of record, requesting all registry revisions, metadata logs, and communications tied to seating and signatory classification. I kept the language narrow and neutral. Accusations make people defensive. Specificity makes them careful. At 10:17, my inbox chimed with a calendar invite from the Hart-Carson Foundation Governance Subcommittee. Urgent alignment session, attendance requested. Requested, not required. Another choice designed for optics. The conference room on the Foundation's 3rd floor had glass walls, polished stone, and a central monitor cycling through donor slides while people filed in with coffee and curated expressions. Evelyn sat at the far end beside the chair reserved for the current board officer. Daniel sat 2 seats down, hands interlaced so tightly his knuckles looked pale. I took the open seat along the side where non-voting attendees were usually placed and set my notebook parallel to the table edge. Evelyn began without preamble. "Thank you all for adjusting schedules. Last night, as many of you observed, emotions ran high during final wedding logistics. Not one person corrected the framing." She continued. "To protect the dignity of all families involved, we are implementing a streamlined guest protocol. Primary invitations remain under Hart family custodial discretion. Auxiliary lists may be accommodated subject to capacity. Then she looked directly at me and delivered the second public cut. Claire will attend planning as bride, not as counsel. We need harmony, not litigation. There it was again. Status stripped by title assignment. Competence recast as threat. Around the table, peers I had briefed for years studied their cups, tablets, cufflinks. A younger associate from compliance met my eyes for half a second, then looked down, ashamed at being seen seeing. My pulse remained even. I opened my notebook and wrote her sentence verbatim before responding. For clarity, I said, is this committee asserting authority to alter guest registries governed by joint charter provisions? Evelyn's smile returned, patient and punishing. You are proving my point. No, I said, I am asking for jurisdiction. Mr. Bellamy shifted in his chair. Perhaps we can avoid formal phrasing and keep this practical. Practical requires defined authority, I said. The room tightened. Rain tracked down the glass in thin vertical lines, blurring the harbour cranes beyond the window. I could feel impatience building, the collective desire to classify me as difficult and move on. That desire was the engine of every erasure I had tolerated. I refused to fuel it with an outburst. I also refused to disappear politely. Evelyn leaned back. Very well, the Hart family office has always managed ceremonial protocol. By custom, I said. Not by charter. She lifted a hand. Again, this is why we asked you to remain in a bridal role. The phrase landed like a door closing. I could have listed her procedural violations then and there. I could have read subsection language aloud and forced immediate acknowledgement. I chose a narrower strike. Please enter into minutes that I object to any unilateral guest list modifications absent joint signatory authorization, and that I requested document preservation at 9:03 this morning, I said. Also enter that I remain available to review lawful revisions. The committee secretary, who had been pretending to check formatting, froze with her fingers above the keyboard. Evelyn's gaze cut toward her. Do not overburden minutes with theatrics. I turned to the secretary, not to Evelyn. If minutes omit material objections, I will submit a written correction under Governance Policy 4.2 within 24 hours. Daniel finally spoke, voice strained. Can we please not do this like a tribunal? I looked at him and answered softly, I asked for one thing last night, honest documents. This is what follows when we do not have them. No one replied. The monitor advanced to a slide showing smiling scholarship recipients under the foundation crest, the kind of image institutions use to suggest moral clarity, while governance phrase beneath it. I closed my notebook, stood, and gathered my folder. I will not disrupt your meeting, I said. Send draft minutes by close of business. Evelyn gave a short nod meant to signal dismissal, but dismissal requires control over consequence, and she no longer had all of it. I walked out through the glass door without hurry, down the corridor lined with framed campaign maps and donor portraits, and into the elevator where metal walls returned my face to me without commentary. Silence was not peace. It was discipline. And that morning it held. The elevator doors parted on the lobby's marble level, and the building gave me back the sounds it preferred over human conflict. Muted heels, printer trays, a cartwheel catching once on a seam in the stone. I stepped out with my folder pressed against my ribs and crossed beneath a row of framed foundation milestones that had always presented progress as a straight line. In the glass of a display case, I caught my reflection beside a plaque carrying the Hart name in engraved brass, and for a second, I looked like a visitor in a museum of decisions made by other people. Then, the exterior doors opened to rain and harbour wind, and Daniel called my name from somewhere behind me. I stopped under the awning but did not turn until he reached me. His tie was loosened, hair damp at the temples, expression suspended between apology and irritation. You keep making this formal, he said, breathing hard from the short run. Every room becomes a record with you. Every room already was a record, I said. I'm only refusing to pretend otherwise. He looked toward the street where traffic moved in grey bands, then back at me. My mother thinks you are trying to punish her. Your mother thinks control and respect are the same thing. That is not fair, I held his gaze. Fair would have been accurate documents, Daniel. He flinched at the use of his full name, the way he always did when I chose precision over comfort. "You could have waited. You could have talked to me privately." "I did. At dinner, in the salon. In your hallway after your mother sent flowers addressed to Daniel Carson and guest when I got promoted. In your kitchen the night she told donors I had a policy hobby instead of a legal practice. Private conversations are where she harvests deniability." Rain tapped the metal lip of the awning between us. He rubbed a hand over his mouth, tired and cornered. "I am trying to keep this family together." The sentence should have included me, but it did not. I felt that omission with the old familiar clarity of pressure against a bruise. "You are trying to keep peace with the person who punishes disagreement in public," I said. "That is a different project." He opened his mouth as if to answer, then shut it. A black town car pulled up at the curb for someone else, and both of us moved half a step to clear the path, two people yielding to traffic while standing inside our own stalemate. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "I need this wedding to happen without a scandal. I need this wedding to happen without falsified hierarchy." He gave one short, defeated nod that was not agreement, only retreat. "I'll send you the draft minutes. Send the attachments too." I left him under the awning and walked into the rain, feeling water soak through the shoulders of my coat as I crossed to the parking structure. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but the conversation had stripped away the thin professional shell I wore in committee rooms, and memory came in harder than I wanted. Not random flashes, not sentiment. A sequence, a pattern with dates attached. 8 years earlier, at a winter fundraiser in the old Maritime Exchange, Evelyn had introduced me to a retired judge as Daniel's thoughtful companion, very diligent with spreadsheets. I had already completed 2 operational inquiries and 1 compliance overhaul by then, and she knew it. I had corrected her softly, "I'm in legal operations," and she had laughed in that bright social register that made contradictions sound childish. "Of course, she is being modest." The judge had nodded to her, not to me, and moved on. Daniel told me in the car afterward that his mother was just anxious around titles. It was my first direct lesson in how thoroughly a person could be diminished by grammar. 3 years earlier, after my mother's surgery, I had brought her to a Hart family luncheon because Daniel insisted inclusion would improve things. We arrived on time to find the seating chart changed. My mother was placed near the service entrance beside a speaker stand and coat racks. When I asked the hostess if there had been an error, Evelyn appeared before the woman could answer and said, "That table is quieter. She will be more comfortable." My mother had smiled and sat down without protest because she had spent her whole life surviving rooms that ran on condescension. During dessert, Evelyn toasted the women who built this family from the inside, naming herself, 2 cousins, and a donor's wife she barely knew. She did not say my mother's name. On the drive home, my mother stared out the window and said, "I have no wish to be where I am tolerated by seating plan." I heard the exhaustion beneath her poise and hated that I had brought her there. 2 years earlier, at the Foundation's spring governance retreat, I was asked to draft a risk memo on procurement exposure tied to a contractor favoured by one of Evelyn's allies. I worked through a weekend, delivered the memo with citations and mitigation pathways, and watched the board chair present its conclusions 48 hours later as guidance synthesised by Family Office Review. Evelyn thanked him publicly for protecting us from unnecessary alarm. When the vote passed along the lines I had recommended, she patted my arm in front of 3 trustees and said, "See what happens when you keep your tone measured?" Not because I was wrong, but because I had accepted theft quietly enough to remain useful. Those were the visible incidents. The quieter ones did more damage. Group photographs where I was asked to hold someone's bag and then left out when the shutter clicked. Programs where my name lost a middle initial and then disappeared entirely in the final print. Drafts circulated with my legal edits incorporated and attributed to committee consensus. Each event could be defended as oversight. Together, they formed intent. That was the architecture of my invalidation. No single blow dramatic enough to alarm bystanders, only repeated subtraction until I looked optional even to people who depended on my work. By the time I reached my office parking level, my throat felt raw from holding too much language still. I sat in the car with the engine off and watched condensation gather on the windshield. Silence had always been described to me as virtue when it protected other people's comfort, flaw when it protected my own dignity. That asymmetry had shaped every room I entered with the Hart family. I was expected to absorb insult without annotation, absorb exclusion without objection, absorb revision without record. The first time I failed to absorb quietly, I became combative. It would have been almost elegant if it had not been so costly. My phone vibrated against the console. The caller ID read, Reverend Magistrate Elias Cole. I answered on the second ring. Ms. Carson, he said. His tone carried courthouse formality even through static. I apologize for short notice. Are you in a private location? Yes. I need to request a brief in-person verification this afternoon regarding a custodial instrument connected to your ceremony. I felt my shoulders set. What kind of instrument? Documentary, he said. Sealed, conditional, and held under trust directive from Judge Thomas Hart. The name landed with weight. Judge Hart had been Daniel's grandfather, former appellate jurist, dead for 11 years, still cited in governance rooms as if his authority could be borrowed by descendants. I had met him once for 12 minutes in a library that smelled of leather and dust and old paper. He had asked me exactly 3 questions, all about process, and nodded once at each answer. Where do you want me? I asked. Rectory office at St. Brigid, 1630. Bring identification. If you choose, bring independent witness. I'll be there. Thank you. This remains confidential pending trigger conditions. The line clicked off. I stayed in the car another 10 seconds, listening to rain drum the garage vents, then called my mother. Can you meet me at St. Brigid at 4:30? I asked. She did not ask why. I'll be there. By late afternoon, the rain had thinned to mist, and the rectory's stone steps held a dark sheen under yellow lamps. St. Brigid sat 3 blocks inland from the harbour, older than most of the city's legal buildings, its hallways lined with varnished wood and framed parish records in narrow script. Reverend Magistrate Cole met us at the office door in a black suit with a white collar tab and a silver watch worn smooth at the edges. He greeted my mother first, then me, and gestured us inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and ink. A brass desk lamp cast an oval of light across a ledger, a digital timestamp unit, and a small lockbox of matte steel with tamper tape crossing the latch. Cole did not sit. Neither did I. For the record, he said, activating an audio recorder and reading the timestamp, present are Reverend Magistrate Elias Cole, Claire Elise Carson, and Helen Carson as witness observer. Purpose, identity confirmation and chain of custody review for instrument TH17, pursuant to Hart Family Trust Addendum. He slid a form toward me. Photo identification, please. I handed over my license and bar card. He examined both, compared signatures, and entered the verification in the ledger with a fountain pen that scratched audibly against the page. Then he turned the lockbox so I could see the seal number. Do you acknowledge this? Matches the reference code sent in my encrypted notice at 1412, he asked. I checked my phone, opened the message, and read the digits twice. It matches. He broke the tamper tape, unlocked the box, and removed an ivory envelope edged in a thin border of blue-black ink. The embossed seal was unmistakable. Thomas E. Hart, Chambers Insignia, retired. The paper was heavier than standard stock, almost card-like, with a fold line that had not been disturbed. My name was typed beneath a second line reading, to be opened only upon certified governance contest affecting ceremony registry. The room seemed to narrow around that sentence. Cole held the envelope flat on the desk, fingertips at the corners, as if presenting evidence in open court. Judge Hart executed this addendum 6 months before his death. It designates me as neutral custodian for ceremonial contingencies involving fiduciary misuse connected to the Foundation and family registry. The letter remains sealed unless a trigger condition is met and documented. What qualifies as trigger? I asked. Any unilateral manipulation of invitation governance by a designated family officer, any coercive misclassification of lawful participants, or any attempt to obstruct named witnesses attached to trust oversight. My mother inhaled sharply but said nothing. Cole continued, precise and unadorned. I am not alleging those conditions are met. I am notifying you that recent filings and committee minutes suggest potential proximity. I require your signature acknowledging awareness of the instrument's existence and your right to request formal review if contest escalates. He passed me the acknowledgement form. At the bottom, beneath the legal language, was the chain of custody history: receipt from Judge Hart's clerk, transfer to Cole, annual seal inspection logs, notarized storage attestations, no gaps, no soft edges. I signed with deliberate strokes and watched him countersign, then watched him photograph the page and upload it through a secure terminal mounted on the shelf behind him. Procedure steadied me in a way reassurance never could. This was not gossip, not threat theatre, not another room asking me to trust tone. It was structure. It was proof waiting for conditions. "May I ask one question outside the form?" I said. "You may." "Why was I named?" Cole regarded me for a moment, expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Judge Hart wrote a supplemental note to me that remains privileged. I can disclose one line because it pertains to fiduciary intent." He wrote, "The person most likely to be denied standing may be the only person willing to protect process." My mother's eyes closed briefly, then opened. Cole returned the envelope to the lockbox, resealed it with new tape, and logged the new seal number. "Instrument remains in my custody. If you request activation, I will require documentary support, not narrative alone." "You'll have documentary support," I said. I assumed as much. When we stepped back into the rectory corridor, the evening bells had begun, low and measured through stone. My mother touched my sleeve, the same small signal she had used when I was a child, and rooms felt too large. "You were never the one without standing," she said. "You were the one they needed not to use it." We walked down the steps into cold air, carrying salt from the harbour and exhaust from commuter traffic. In my bag, the signed acknowledgement copy rested beside committee minutes and preservation notices, paper against paper, record against revision. The envelope itself remained locked behind us, but its existence had entered the map. For the first time since the engagement dinner, I felt the geometry of the conflict tilt, not toward revenge, but toward verifiable balance, the kind that does not depend on who speaks loudest at a head table. My phone rang before we reached the curb, and the screen showed a number from the Foundation Registrar's office I had called twice that week without reply. I answered while my mother stood beside me under the stone arch, her coat collar turned up against the wind. "Ms. Carson," a man said, voice clipped and careful. "This is Leonard Pike, Registry Administrator for the Hart-Carson ceremony file. I am required to notify all affected parties that a revised attendance matrix has been uploaded and locked pending final print." "By whose authorization?" I asked. A pause. Paper shifted on his end. "Hart Family Officer Override. Name: Mrs. Evelyn Hart." The bells from St. Bridget kept sounding behind us, steady as a metronome while he recited the next line in a tone that told me he did not agree with what he was reading. "The following categories are now marked inactive: auxiliary military guests, non-lineal parental attendees, and contingent witness entries not certified by family office." My mother did not ask what he meant. She heard enough in my silence. "Read the names," I said. He did. Captain Darius Wynne, Commander Leah Ito, Chief Ramos, my former unit liaison, 2 trustees tied to Judge Hart's archival review, and my mother, Helen Carson, moved from confirmed to pending capacity and then to inactive in the final lock field. The language was technical, almost sterile. The result was not. "When was the lock executed?" I asked. 1814. I checked the clock on my screen. It had been less than 40 minutes. "Was there dual signatory confirmation?" "No, ma'am." "Then your lock violated joint governance." His breathing caught once. "I am aware of the discrepancy. Email me the full audit log and metadata chain now. Include source terminal ID. I can send a compliance excerpt." "Send all of it, Mr. Pike. If your system blocks complete export, state that in writing." "Yes, ma'am." He disconnected before courtesy phrases could dilute the record. I stood on the rectory steps with the harbour air cutting through my sleeves and felt the pressure shift from personal contempt into active procedural trespass. Evelyn had not only changed a list, she had moved against witnesses attached to the same trust framework Cole had logged minutes earlier. She was betting speed against process, Optics against documentation. And she was doing it at night because people often mistake fatigue for consent. My mother watched my face. She removed me. Yes. She removed your sailors too. I nodded. She drew one long breath and set her shoulders the way she had before parent conferences, medical meetings, and every room where civility was used as a gate. Then we go where the list lives, she said. The Foundation Annex stayed open late during wedding week, and by the time we drove there, the mist had turned to a fine rain that silvered the windows. Inside, fluorescent light flattened every expression into something managerial. A temporary sign near the elevator read, "Ceremony operations authorized personnel only," as if celebration were an incident command post. At the security desk, a young guard looked at my ID, scanned his tablet, and then looked back at me with visible discomfort. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carson," he said. "Your access level for floor 3 has been changed to observer escort only." "By whom?" "Family Office Administrator." He glanced at my mother's license and swallowed. "Ms. Helen Carson is not on tonight's entry roster." I heard the old choreography click into place again. Barrier first, explanation second. Politeness used as a muzzle. "Call your supervisor," I said. He did, and while we waited, staff passed through the turnstiles carrying print folders and floral inventory sheets, each one looking at us and then looking away. The supervisor arrived in under 2 minutes, tie askew, badge on a retractable cord, posture rigid with the strain of enforcing a rule he had not written. "Ms. Carson," he said, "we have direction that all guest list matters route through Mrs. Hart's office this evening. I am listed as co-principal in the ceremony charter." He kept his hands folded at his waist. "I understand." "Then you understand this access block is improper." He lowered his voice. "I am not authorized to adjudicate governance." "No. You're authorized to log incidents. Open an incident report and include that I requested entry to review a unilateral lock affecting named witnesses, an immediate family." He hesitated, then nodded once and motioned the guard toward the terminal. I dictated the line slowly enough to ensure spelling accuracy, and I watched him type each word. My mother stood beside me, silent and upright, excluded again by name in a building where I had drafted half the policies hanging on their intranet. By the time the report printed, it was fully dark outside. I signed the complainant line, took a photo of the case number and sent it to 3 addresses: Foundation Counsel, Reverend Magistrate Cole and Leonard Pike, with a simple instruction. "Attach this to Registry Dispute File." The guard printed an escort badge for me and none for my mother. "Only one may proceed," he said, almost whispering. I turned to her, waiting for protest. She gave me none. "Go," she said. "Bring back paper." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than its 30 seconds, metal walls reflecting my face in narrow panels that made me look segmented, like a person reduced to administrative fields. When the doors opened, the corridor smelled of toner, coffee gone bitter, and peony stems cut too early. At the end of the hall, through the glass wall of Conference C, I could see Evelyn standing at the monitor, with 4 committee members and 2 event vendors. The screen displayed the revised seating grid in colour blocks: Legacy, Trustee, Family, Auxiliary, Inactive. My people were grey. I entered with my escort badge visible and took the only chair left, placed near the door. Evelyn did not greet me. "This is a working session," she said. "Observer status means no interventions." "Observer status was imposed without authority," she clicked to the next slide. "We are out of time for procedural monologues." One vendor, a man from logistics, kept his eyes on his laptop and pretended he had not heard either of us. The committee secretary avoided looking at me altogether. On the table sat a stack of pre-printed place cards with corrected spelling for everyone who mattered to Evelyn's narrative and blank stock for everyone else. "I received notice of an override executed at 1814, I said. "Provide the legal basis for removing certified guests and named witnesses." Evelyn folded her hands, voice smooth. "Capacity optimization. Security concerns. Family discretion." "Cite the section. We are not litigating in front of florists." Her allies gave the small, restrained smiles people use when cruelty has been packaged as efficiency. She pointed a pen at the screen and continued speaking to the room, not to me. Primary row assignments are final. Late substitutions must be approved by the family officer. Non-essential attendees can view the ceremony remotely. Non-essential. That was the word she chose for the people who had stood watch with me through 40-hour cycles, for the mother who taught me how not to bend under polished contempt, for witnesses tied to a trust condition she did not yet know had been activated in proximity. I wrote the word down exactly as spoken. At 9:11 p.m, Leonard Pike sent the audit export to my phone. I opened it under the table and felt my pulse settle into a colder rhythm as the metadata populated line by line. Terminal ID from Evelyn's private office, override key used after hours, dual authentication prompt bypassed under emergency event code that required imminent hazard notation. Hazard field left blank. She had forced the system through its own safeguards and left a hole where justification should have been. I stood. Evelyn looked up, annoyed more than alarmed. "Sit down, Claire. You're not recognised." "I don't need recognition to submit evidence," I said. I placed my phone on the table, screen facing the committee. Audit log confirms unauthorised emergency override with blank hazard notation and no secondary signatory. This meeting is now on notice of potential fiduciary breach. One trustee shifted sharply in his chair. The logistics vendor finally looked at the screen. The secretary's fingers hovered over her keyboard, waiting to see whose fear to obey. Evelyn's expression changed by degrees, first irritation, then calculation. "Where did you obtain that file?" "From your registry administrator." Her jaw set. "This is exactly why you were moved to observer." "No," I said. "This is why you moved me." The door opened behind me before she could answer. Security had returned, not with one guard this time, but with the floor manager and a man in dress blues, carrying rein on his shoulders and authority in every step he took across the threshold. Admiral René Alvarez removed his cap, handed it to the aide behind him, and took in the room with one sweep of practiced attention. "I was told there is a registry conflict affecting invited service members," he said. No one spoke for 2 full seconds. Evelyn recovered first. "Admiral Alvarez, thank you for coming. This is an internal family logistics review." He looked at her, then at me, then at the monitor with grey blocks where names should have been. "My office received 3 turn-away notices in the last hour," he said. "One for Commander Ito, one for Chief Ramos, one for Captain Wynne. All were invited under original charter and then recategorized inactive. I asked to verify whether that was clerical error." "It was not an error," Evelyn said. "We are managing capacity." Alvarez stepped closer to the table and read the category labels without touching anything. "Capacity does not explain why designated rescue personnel were removed as a group." He turned to me, formal and direct. "Ms. Carson, did you request their attendance?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" "Witnesses of record and guests." He gave one short nod, then addressed the room, voice even but carrying the force of command. "For clarity, Ms. Carson is not a ceremonial accessory. She led the rescue analysis cell during the North Atlantic Incident Review. I signed the commendation package myself. If this institution is categorizing people by legitimacy, it will use accurate criteria." The words did not raise volume. They changed gravity. The committee secretary began typing without waiting for permission. The logistics vendor closed his laptop halfway and sat straighter. One trustee who had not defended me all month finally spoke, cautious but audible. "Perhaps we should pause implementation pending council review." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her pen until her knuckles blanched. "Admiral, with respect, this remains a private family matter. Not when invited naval personnel are excluded through irregular process," he said. "Not when an emergency override is used without hazard notation. And not when the individual being sidelined is the same one whose work protected sailors under my command." He looked to the floor manager. "I want a copy of the incident report filed downstairs within 15 minutes, and I want the current registry preserved with hash verification. No edits until council is present." The manager nodded immediately. "Yes, Admiral." Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, then reached for water and set the glass down untouched. Around her, the room's allegiance did what it always did when real authority entered. It resorted itself without apology. People who had ignored me for weeks suddenly found procedural language. People who had mistaken restraint for weakness began to annotate. I sent one message while they spoke, brief and precise, to my mother waiting below. "Come upstairs. You're being reinstated pending review." Her reply came 10 seconds later. "I'm already at the elevator." By the time she stepped into Conference C, escorted properly this time, the printed place card stack had been moved from Evelyn's side of the table to the centre, where no single hand could claim it. Admiral Alvarez inclined his head to my mother before returning to the manager's checklist. It was not theatrical kindness. It was acknowledgement, public and unambiguous. I stood beside her and watched the monitor freeze on the disputed grid while the preservation protocol ran. No one congratulated me. No one apologized. Institutions rarely offer either in real time. They offer minutes, timestamps, and changed behavior when compelled by witnesses who cannot be dismissed. That night, under fluorescent light and the smell of wet wool and toner, social pressure had reached for my throat again and found documentation waiting. Then, a credible voice named what I was in front of the same kind of audience that had once found it convenient to forget. The secretary's keyboard kept ticking, a small mechanical pulse in a room that had finally stopped pretending not to understand what was happening. Admiral Alvarez remained standing near the monitor, one hand resting on the back of a chair he did not take, while the preservation protocol crawled across the lower corner of the screen in a blue progress bar. Evelyn stood opposite him with her chin lifted and her shoulders locked, the posture of a person still trying to govern a room that had moved beyond her reach. My mother stayed beside me, her hands folded over her bag, eyes on the disputed grid, as if she could hold steady the names being fought over. "Status," Alvarez said to the floor manager. "Archive mirror initiated, Admiral. Hash verification in process. I want verbal confirmation from Registry Administrator." The manager glanced at me, then at Evelyn, then placed a call on speaker. Leonard Pike answered on the third ring, voice thinner than before but clear. "Registry Administration. This is Alvarez. Confirm the override conditions at 1814. Pike inhaled once. Emergency event code was used from terminal HFO3A, assigned to Hart Family Office. Required hazard narrative field was left blank. Secondary authorization prompt was bypassed. The lock affected 9 entries, moved to inactive. Read the 9. He read every name, including my mother's, with no abbreviations and no softening. In procedural settings, full names are dignity. Alvarez nodded toward the secretary. Enter that verbatim. Evelyn finally stepped forward. "This has become disproportionate. We are discussing wedding seating, not fleet readiness." I answered before anyone else could translate her line into something kinder. "No, we are discussing fiduciary misuse inside a documented governance system." She turned to me with controlled contempt. "You are still converting family matters into litigation. Family matters do not require fraudulent emergency codes." The logistics vendor looked down. One trustee stared at his own hands. Another asked for water and then did not drink it. The room had shifted from deference to self-protection so quickly it almost felt audible, like pressure releasing from a sealed compartment. By the time the preservation bar reached 100%, the floor manager printed a 1-page verification sheet and placed it in the center of the table, equidistant from everyone. He did not hand it to Evelyn. He did not hand it to me. He set it where process, not personality, could claim it. "Archive complete," he said. "Current disputed state frozen at 1928. Edits disabled pending directive." "Good," Alvarez said. He looked to the trustees. "You have 2 immediate options. Maintain an unauthorized registry and accept formal referral, or restore the last compliant list and proceed under oversight. Decide now." No one answered at once. The fluorescent lights hummed over polished glass and damp wool. Outside the windows, rain dragged silver lines down the dark. I placed my phone beside the verification sheet and turned the audit log toward the trustees. "For clarity, restoration target is version 42B, timestamp 1756, the last list executed with joint charter compliance. I request immediate rollback and issuance of corrected entry credentials tonight." One trustee cleared his throat. "Is there a motion on the table?" The secretary looked up, startled by the sudden return of formal order. Motion can be entered. I move we restore 42B pending council review, he said. Second, said the trustee beside him too quickly. Evelyn's face lost colour in a visible wave, not dramatic, just decisive. You are voting under pressure from an external military figure in a private governance space. Alvarez's voice stayed level. I am present because named personnel under my command were improperly excluded. Your vote is your own. I met Evelyn's eyes. You wanted this to be private because private gives you deniability. You made it administrative. Administrative leaves tracks. The secretary's hands trembled once before she steadied them over the keys. Vote recorded. Motion passes 4-1. The number hung in the room with a kind of clean finality. 4-1. Not argument, not emotion, not interpretation. Implement, Alvarez said. The floor manager turned to the terminal at the side credenza and initiated the rollback under witness view. Each step displayed on the monitor. Load archived version, verify integrity, publish active registry, generate entry credentials. Names returned from grey to assigned colours one row at a time. Commander Ito, Chief Ramos, Captain Wynne, Helen Carson. 2 estate witnesses, restored from inactive to confirmed front section. I watched each line reappear and felt the cold knot in my chest loosen by increments so small they were almost imperceptible. Evelyn reached for the water glass then, fingers rigid, and brought it to her mouth. She swallowed once, coughed softly, and set it down without finishing. Her lipstick left a faint mark on the rim that looked like an error on a signed page. She tried to speak and paused long enough that the pause became its own statement. This is not final authority, she managed. I remain family officer. Current authority is constrained by recorded vote and compliance hold, said the trustee who had made the motion, not looking at her while he spoke. That is final for tonight. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Enablers can endure scandal longer than they can endure lost utility. The printer in the corner started feeding cardstock in brisk, even bursts. New place cards emerged in a white stack, ink still damp. The floor manager sorted them with gloved hands and asked, "Who verifies corrected placements?" The trustees looked at one another. No one volunteered. Alvarez answered first. "Ms. Carson verifies." Evelyn gave a short, incredulous breath. "She is the disputing party." I kept my voice flat. I am co-principal under charter and the party affected by your override. Verification by me is not conflict, it is required balance. No one challenged that. The floor manager handed me the stack. Card by card, I read each name aloud and matched it to the restored grid, while the secretary recorded confirmation. Helen Carson, front row section B, seat 4. Captain Darius Wynne, section B, seat 5. Commander Leah Ito, section B, seat 6. Chief Mateo Ramos, section B, seat 7. Each line returned a person to visibility. Each line erased one engineered absence. Behind me, the door opened again. Daniel stepped in with rain-darkened shoulders and stopped when he saw the monitor, the admiral, the trustees in formal posture, and me holding the corrected cards like evidence. "What happened?" he asked, but the question was aimed at the wrong person. Evelyn answered without turning. "Your fiancé escalated a family matter into a tribunal." Daniel looked at the screen long enough to read the words, "Emergency override and rollback executed." Then at me. "Is that true?" "It was already a tribunal," I said. "I just declined to stand trial without records." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and nodded once, almost to himself. He did not defend his mother. He did not defend me. He moved to the back wall and stayed there in silence. The rollback completed at 1942. The manager printed the implementation certificate and the incident report addendum, then slid both into clear sleeves and placed them in front of the secretary for signatures. One by one, the trustees signed. When the sleeve reached Evelyn, she left her hand on the table and stared at the line where her name was typed. "I object to this framing," she said. "Objection noted," said the secretary. "Signature acknowledges receipt, not agreement." For several seconds, Evelyn did not move. The room waited her out. At last she took the pen, signed with a compressed stroke, and returned it with a click against the glass tabletop. Her hand shook once afterward, barely visible unless you were looking for tremor. I was looking. Alvarez checked his watch. Entry control must receive updated roster now. No guest on 42B is turned away. If there is a discrepancy at the door, my office is called directly. Yes, Admiral, said the floor manager. I turned to my mother and handed her the restored card with her name centered in black serif type. No qualifiers, no pending status, no administrative disguise. She took it with both hands as if it were fragile, then looked at me with an expression I had seen only twice before, once when I passed the bar, once when she rang the hospital bell after treatment. Pride without noise. Evelyn watched that exchange and looked away first. The remaining trustees began collecting laptops and folders, each movement careful, subdued. People who had laughed at her smallest lines now avoided meeting her eyes. The social economy she had commanded all season was not collapsing in flames. It was draining out through procedure, vote by vote, signature by signature, until she sat at the head of the table with no one taking cues from her. Public humiliation had once been her instrument. Tonight, it was her environment. As the room thinned, she spoke one final time, quieter than I had ever heard her. "You wanted to embarrass me." I answered with the same restraint I had carried since the engagement dinner. "I wanted an accurate record." She did not reply. Her throat worked once, as if another sentence had reached the surface and failed there. Then she folded her hands, fixed her gaze on the dead projector screen, and said nothing else. Alvarez collected his cap, inclined his head to my mother, then to me. "Miss Carson, Admiral. For the record," he said, loud enough for the remaining staff to hear, "you handled this correctly." It was not praise, it was authentication, clean and public. In rooms like these, that mattered more. He left with his aide. The floor manager hurried out to deliver the corrected roster to entry control. The secretary remained long enough to hand me a stamped copy of the vote, minutes and incident addendum, her eyes meeting mine for the first time all night. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "Keep your copy complete," I said. "That is enough." She nodded and went. At last, only 4 of us remained. My mother, Daniel near the wall, Evelyn at the head chair, and me standing with the stack of restored cards against my palm. No one argued. No one reached for reconciliation language. The fluorescent lights flattened us all into the same hard clarity. I placed the final corrected card in the center seat map tray, aligned its edges, and closed the file sleeve over the implementation certificate. Then I gathered my documents, offered my mother my arm, and walked her to the door at a measured pace, leaving behind a silence that no longer belonged to fear. The corridor outside Conference C was colder than the room we had left, the vents set too high, the fluorescent light turning everyone's skin into paper. My mother and I had nearly reached the elevator when Daniel caught up, a file sleeve in his hand, and rain still darkening the shoulders of his jacket. He did not reach for me. He held out the sleeve instead. "These are the draft minutes from this morning's governance session," he said, "with attachments. The secretary sent corrections after your objection." I took the sleeve and checked the contents in the hallway under the light. Committee minutes with my objection entered verbatim. The preservation notice time-stamped at 9:03 and the distribution list that proved who had received it and when. "Thank you," I said, because precision did not require cruelty. He nodded once, jaw tight. "My mother intends to proceed tomorrow as if tonight was a misunderstanding." It was not a misunderstanding. I know. The admission cost him something visible. He looked past me to my mother, then back. "Are you still going forward?" "With the ceremony, yes. Without false records, also yes." He exhaled, almost a laugh without humour. "I should have said that first." My mother answered before I did. "You should have said it months ago." Her voice stayed level, not sharp, which made the sentence land harder. Daniel did not defend himself. He stepped back, and that was all. By 7 the next morning, my dining table had become a controlled archive. Implementation certificate in one folder, incident report and addendum in another, registry rollback proof, audit metadata export from Leonard Pike, and the signed acknowledgement from Reverend Magistrate Cole confirming my right to request activation of instrument TH17. I called Foundation Counsel first. She answered on the second ring. "I received your packet," she said. "Preservation hold is now formal. No destruction, no edits, no substitutions outside council review." Has that been acknowledged in writing by all recipients? Yes, including Mrs. Hart. Then I called Leonard Pike. Registry status, I said. Version 42B remains live, he replied. Door tablets synced at 6:12. I also appended your downstairs incident report to the master dispute file. Any further override attempts? 2 login attempts from family office after lock. Both denied. Logged. I wrote that down and thanked him. Every contact had an outcome. Every report now had a home. At 10:30, I met Reverend Magistrate Cole in the vestry office behind the sanctuary. The room held the same cedar and ink scent as the day before, and the same lockbox sat on the desk, resealed. Cole reviewed the new documents in silence, placing each page in order as if assembling a brief for appellate review. My mother sat 2 chairs down, hands folded. Marisol stood near the door, invited as an additional witness at my request, her expression composed but pale. Cole tapped the implementation certificate with his pen. Contested governance and unilateral manipulation are both documented. Trigger condition is met. He looked to Marisol. Miss Ruiz, state your role for the record. Junior Events Coordinator, she said, voice steadying as she continued. I handled place card print queues and received override instructions from Mrs. Hart's office. I retained version logs when I saw non-compliant changes. I should have escalated earlier. Cole nodded. Did anyone instruct you to conceal revisions? A pause. I was told to keep family matters elegant. Understood. That line resolved the look she had given me at the engagement dinner, the half-inch movement of my card, and her frozen hand. She had seen the line then. Today, she named it. Cole returned to the lockbox, checked the new seal number against his ledger, broke the tape, and removed the ivory envelope. He did not open it yet. I will read this only if disruption occurs in ceremony flow or if contested attendees are denied entry, contrary to restored registry. Given prior conduct, I am moving it to immediate readiness. Do what you need to do, I said. He met my eyes. I intend to. When guests began arriving at St. Bridget that afternoon, the rain had cleared and left the stone steps shining under a hammered steel sky. The nave smelled of candle wax and old wood polish. Ushers stood with tablets at both doors, scanning names against the restored list. For 20 minutes, entry moved cleanly. Then Evelyn arrived in pearl grey with 2 volunteers and a printed packet in her hand. At the north door, she leaned toward the usher tablet and said, "Use the family final. Not that one." The usher, young and visibly anxious, glanced at his supervisor. "Ma'am, we are under compliance directive to use digital 42B. Evelyn held up the packet. "I am family officer. These are corrected placements." Behind her, Captain Wynne and Commander Ito waited in dress uniforms, and my mother stood with Admiral Alvarez near the aisle. The usher looked from the tablet to the packet, as if choosing between 2 laws. Cole stepped from the chancel before the choice could become another ritual. "Pause entry," he said, voice carrying through the nave. "All parties remain where they are." The quartet stopped in the middle of a measure. Conversations thinned to silence. Cole moved to the centre, opened the ivory envelope with deliberate care, unfolded the letter, and read in the same judicial cadence he used at custody hearings. By directive of Thomas E. Hart, executed under Trust Addendum TH17. Any unilateral manipulation of wedding registry governance by a Hart family officer constitutes breach of fiduciary duty and triggers immediate public disclosure. Upon such breach, ceremonial and related charitable authority transfer in full to Claire Elise Carson, designated successor steward for Hart Carson Foundation's ceremonial governance. He lifted his eyes from the page. The trigger condition has been documented. Transfer is now in effect. No one in that room misunderstood him. Trustees seated in the first section looked at one another, then at Evelyn, then at me. The floor manager from the annex rose and handed Cole the sealed implementation certificate as corroboration. Cole read the timestamp aloud. The room listened like a jury. Admiral Alvarez stood, uniform catching the light. "For the record," he said, "Miss Carson led the rescue analysis that saved 31 sailors under storm conditions. If this room intends to measure legitimacy, it will measure accurately." The sentence settled over the pews like a gavel strike. One trustee, Bellamy, asked for recognition and received it from Cole with a short nod. I move immediate suspension of Evelyn Hart's board proxy pending formal fiduciary review, Bellamy said, not looking toward her. Another trustee seconded. A third called the vote. Hands rose, counted, and entered by the secretary in real time. Proxy suspended, effective immediately. Evelyn went pale in a slow, unmistakable wash. She reached for a water glass offered by a volunteer, tried to swallow, and lowered it untouched. The printed packet in her hand trembled once, then stilled as she placed it on the nearest pew and sat without speaking. Her defeat was not theatrical. It was administrative and complete. "Proceed with corrected seating," Cole instructed. The ushers resumed, this time with no one questioning the tablets. Captain Wynne, Commander Ito, Chief Ramos, and the estate witnesses were escorted to the front rows. My mother took the seat beside Admiral Alvarez, exactly where the restored card had placed her. Marisol crossed the aisle and handed me a small, clear sleeve. "I kept the discarded print cue," she whispered. "For your file, all versions with timestamps." I accepted it. "Thank you for finishing what you started." She gave one short nod and moved back to operations. The ceremony itself was simple and unadorned. No one made speeches beyond the vows. No one attempted another correction from the aisle. Daniel's voice shook once, then steadied. Mine did not shake at all. When Cole pronounced us married, the sound in the room was not rapture, it was release. The exhale of witnesses who had watched pressure reverse in public and did not know where to rest their eyes. After signatures, I stood at the side table and closed every open loop in ink. I signed the marriage register. I signed receipt for TH17 disclosure copy. I countersigned the trustee vote extract and handed it to Foundation Counsel, who placed it in a Redwell folder marked for filing. I logged Marisol's print cue sleeve into the same evidence index as Pike's metadata export and the downstairs incident report. Nothing was loose. Nothing was left to memory alone. Some people approached to apologize. A few did it directly. Bellamy said, "I should have intervened sooner." I answered, "Then intervene sooner next time." The scholarship board woman who had sipped water she did not need met my gaze and said nothing. She was one of several who never explained their silence, and I noted that absence as plainly as I had noted every word spoken. The retired captain who told me at dinner that Evelyn's conduct was not acceptable saluted me once in quiet acknowledgement before he left. Even that small gesture found its place in the record. At dusk, after the last guest departed and the candles were extinguished, I stood alone for a moment near the front pew where my mother had sat. Wax and cedar hung in the cooling air. Outside, harbour wind moved through the church doors in clean, cold currents. I could hear staff stacking chairs in the hall and the muted clink of glass being packed away. Ordinary sounds after extraordinary strain. I did not feel triumphant. I felt aligned. My name is Claire Carson. In rooms built to erase me, I learned to answer with records, witnesses, and composure that could not be recast as permission. Silence was never weakness in me. It was disciplined timing. Tonight I kept my dignity, my truth, my family's rightful place, and the authority I was told I did not have until the room itself had to say my name.